At the end of chapter 10 of the book of Hebrews, we have these words: "But we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but to those who have faith and are saved or rescued." We're going to focus on that word faith. Seems to hold the key. So let's move on in this and the following presentation to look at the idea of faith and what it means for us today in practical terms. People come to us and they say, "I wish I had your faith," and they kind of put us up on a pedestal. But in fact, the last thing we feel is being on a pedestal. Inwardly, we're still struggling. Some people just say, "I feel it in my bones." Is that faith? And let's be honest, down through the centuries and indeed today, the followers of Jesus, we have got sidetracked into all sorts of crazy things that we believe, and we're still doing it today. Is that faith? Does faith mean a leap of faith, or we just plunge into the darkness, not know where we're going? Is that how the Bible sees faith? There are those who bring up a list of the A's, the B's, the C's of faith. Do this, do that, do the other. Believe this, believe that, believe the other. That's faith, you're in. Now, maybe what we believe is important. Yes, it is. But is that faith? And some people think that faith is the kind of the opposite of doubt. And then when we have doubts, we begin to wonder whether we've got faith at all. Is faith the opposite of doubt? And we screw up our courage, our determination. I will have more faith. I will have more faith. I'll try better. Is that what faith is all about? Let's go back to the verse. We put it in the original language, just brought into English. Doesn't read very well. But we are not of withdrawal to destruction, but of faith to possession of soul. Now this is written to groups of followers of Jesus who are in the middle of and facing a lot of persecution, a lot of resistance, a lot of problems in life. Too easy when we're faced with that lot to withdraw. We lose our way in life. When things don't work out. Let's look at the words. We miss out on all that life has got. Total loss. Under the pressure of events and situations around us. But that carries the idea of obtaining or preserving something. But what's soul? Nothing to do with your spirit, different word. The soul is the word that speaks of what makes you the person you are. Your mind, your thinking, your decisions, your emotions, your being, what makes you, you. So faith is the possession of ourselves. But that little preposition to hints at the idea of movement towards. We're up against it in life, and are we going to move towards losing everything? Or are we going to move towards the fulfillment of all that God made us to be, the person we are? And perhaps that captures the meaning of what the writer is saying. But the key to it is that word, faith. What is faith? How do we have it? How do we go forward to be successful? Throughout the Bible, you sometimes see the word faith, sometimes faithfulness. Is there a difference? What does the Bible mean by these words? Now we've got three words in the English: faith, faithfulness, and to believe. Now the problem is English. It's quite clear in the original languages. In English, they all come from the same word in the original languages. Now when you get that, faith, faithfulness, to believe is basically one word. It starts to make sense. You see, we don't have a verb to faith. That's not English. It's just not in the structured language, but it's in both original languages of the Bible. So the nearest we've got is to have faith. But to make it easier for us, in English we use to believe, and as soon as you use the word believe, you've got a problem because you think it's intellectual. It's not primarily intellectual at all. That word that translates all three is a word of action, a word of response. It's not primarily a word of the mind to believe certain facts. Let me give you an example. You may face going to the bus station. You want to go to a certain location. Look around the buses and you see the name of the destination in the front of the bus. Now that's your mind working. Faith is, you step on the bus, you pay the driver the fare, you take a seat expecting the bus to get you there. Faith is a word of action, not a word of the mind primarily. And it's one word for all three. Now the key is the next chapter, and this verse leads into the next chapter, and it shows how people down through history who were facing really tough times, difficult opposition or uncertainty or things not happening as they expected, how did they hang on? And the writer is showing how that it's examples of faith. But he starts with a terse description. What do you mean by faith? Which could equally be translated faithfulness. It's the same word. Then the writer looks at the lives of great men and women of faith from the past, where the odds were stacked against them. How did they cope? And this offers a model for us today. It's an example of perseverance when things don't work out, when we don't see the way forward, and how to endure, how to get through, how to be the person God made us to be and go through. And it illustrates a different kind of lifestyle. It's an alternative lifestyle. Doesn't quite fit into the way society normally goes, and that's uncomfortable. So that's the logic of the chapter. Let's look at the first three verses. Faith is the confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. We're going to spend a moment or two just unpacking to see what this actually says. Let's start by looking at that first pair of sentences, particularly the first sentence. I've picked it out here. Now, that bit of the letter is translated in various versions in different ways, and it's often presented to us as a clear statement of the meaning of faith. And if we're honest, sometimes we're a bit scared to admit we don't get it. It's not easy. And very often for us the meaning is not clear. What on earth is faith in practical terms? Confidence, what we hope for, assurance about what we do not see. What's the writer driving at? What's the underpinning ideas behind this? Here are alternative ways of looking at it. The reality of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, the pledge of things hoped for, the conviction of things we cannot see. Different ways of translating it, all quite valid. That's what the original says. The reality of things being hoped, the evidence of things not being seen. Doesn't read as good English, but that's what it actually says. Reality, that word there, carries the idea of confident assurance that we will experience some reality that we hope for. Something we've been promised, something in our deepest being we believe is going to be. We're confident that we will experience it. Now, it's actually a rare word, and it comes from a word from Greek philosophy. But that word's a common word. Conviction about the existence of the spiritual world promised by God. There's something more than just a physical world around us. And that's a common word with a range of meanings. Here is my attempt to try and grasp the central meaning. Short and practical. We're living in the reality of the spiritual realm. Now that fulfills what God made us to be the person that we are. Living in the reality of the spiritual realm. We're looking beyond the physical things. We're seeing something deeper. Now, if you think about it for a moment, there are two things in life. We can live for the here and now, the physical reality of this world, and that's the normal way that human beings live. And tragically, it dominates our Western thought today. We live for the world around, for our own decisions, what makes us happy, for our families, our workplace, our possessions, our wealth, whatever. Here is an alternative lifestyle. Living in the light of an unseen spiritual reality. But this reality has become increasingly real for us. There's something more than the physical. We've begun to see it. We're living our lives, it's an action word, in the light of that spiritual reality. And faith and faithfulness, why is it one word? Because faith is just a one-off expression of this. We take a decision, we do something, because we're seeing the spiritual reality, or we do it regularly, ongoing, living in the light of the unseen spiritual reality, not just for the physical. That's my practical interpretation. We take God seriously and respond accordingly. Now, it means taking God seriously, listening, but responding accordingly is a word of doing. We take action. We respond to what God has done, what God has said, to the spiritual reality that we've begun to grasp. I make it personal now. We live our lives in the context of an unseen spiritual reality. It's become increasingly real for us. Now let's go back to our text and look at the second part. That's what it says, by faith. That's living this way. Living in the consciousness of a spiritual reality. We're responding to God. By faith we understand the ages to have been adjusted by the word of God, so that the thing being seen to have become not out of things as they appear. Or reads as terrible English. In the sentence that word is emphasized. That's the central thing. Faith, living in the reality of the spiritual realm, responding to God, having listened to Him. That's central. Nothing to do with the Bible as such. This is the spoken word of God. God spoke. Things will happen, have happened. The thing being seen, that's why it talks about the universe formed. Came into being because God spoke. It's got a spiritual dimension. God is behind it. It's not just physical. We're back to our picture of the reality. Do we look at the world around and just see the physical reality, which is the normal way of our society, or do we take the alternative thought form? God's at the center of this. He's behind this. He's a purpose in it, and a purpose in it for your life and mine. The visible world of daily experience, do we just live for that? Or do we live looking behind it to the spiritual reality of what God is, what He says, what He does, and we respond, a word of action? That's faith. We've got the physical reality, we've got the spiritual reality. Faith means living in the spiritual reality, not just the physical reality. Oh, the physical reality is very important, but the spiritual reality makes sense of it. So I'm back to my description. We live our lives in the context of an unseen spiritual reality, which is becoming increasingly real for us. God made us. God has a purpose for us, and we find our fulfillment when we live in the light of that, responding to God, taking action accordingly. The rest of chapter 11 gives the examples, and this brings it to life, makes it real, by looking at examples that will be familiar to the original hearers. Now, I'm going to summarize this very quickly. Going away back into Genesis, Abel had his life cut short prematurely. By contrast, Enoch moved seamlessly from this life to the next at a great old age. Both lived in the light of the spiritual reality of God and are commended. Noah, he saw the spiritual reality, not the physical reality of the world around him. He saw what God was going to do and took action, even though it seemed crazy to those around. A lot of time is spent on Abraham. God said, shift your life, move. He obeyed, he went. He didn't know where he was going, and there were no maps in those days. He made his home like a stranger in a foreign country, a country that God said, I'll give this country to your descendants. And when eventually he did have a descendant, God tested him, and he's prepared to sacrifice that descendant. We can learn a lot from Abraham. It's a central feature of this chapter. Son, grandson, and great-grandson, all of them saw the future in the fulfillment of God's promises. God said, your descendants will have the land. Hundreds of years later, before it happened, but they lived their lives in the light of what God had said. They acted accordingly, because they knew God would keep his promise. Moses' parents, they're commended, they protected him. But Moses later had to choose which way he's going to go in life. And after a series of events, he chose to obey God, to listen to him, to take action, to respond to God, and to lead his people, though the life was an extremely uncomfortable life he had to go forward with. That was his fulfillment. That made him the person he was. The people had to respond. They had to put their one foot in front of the other and cross the Red Sea. They had to march around Jericho, a crazy activity. But they listened to God, they responded. They saw their fulfillment. And Rahab, she'd heard the news. She saw what God was doing. She realized it was God. She identified with God's people. Her life fulfillment. And from her family line, Jesus was born. Then there's a list of people, and it's a remarkable list of exploits. The things these people did. They listened to God. They responded accordingly. They lived in the light of the spiritual realm, the reality of it, that God would keep his promises, God would take them through. Now all of these people were up against it in different ways. Faith saw them through to the fulfillment, their life fulfillment. The word faith, I think it's worth recognizing that it's often better seen as faithfulness. In the original language, it could be either way. When you see the word faith, just put in the word faithfulness mentally. See if it brings it to light more. It often helps. Let's summarize this. Listening to God. Taking God seriously. Oh, that is so central and important. But then they responded accordingly. All these folk, they're examples for us. They were up against it in different ways. They listened. They took what God said seriously. They responded accordingly. They were living in the light of the hidden, unseen, spiritual realm and the purposes of God. Then you've got that strange statement in the chapter. Without faith. Now remember that word, it's not intellectual belief. Without faith, being willing to listen to God, take Him seriously, respond accordingly. We're living in the light of His ways. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. Because anyone who comes to Him, and we're listening to Him, must believe He exists, and that He rewards those who earnestly seek Him. God will speak to us. He will direct us. He will enable us to get through and fulfill our life's destiny. Back to our description. We're living our lives in the context of an unseen spiritual reality, the God who made the universe. And the reality of who God is, what Jesus done, is becoming increasingly real for us. That's not an intellectual thing. It's a decision thing. Faith is a decision. The people of the Old Testament in the chapter that are listed there, they could have taken a decision to go a different way. They'd have missed out. They wouldn't have fulfilled their life destiny. It's a decision, not a feeling. But it's a decision that's not irrational. Tragedy is in so much religion throughout the world today, non-religious people mock us because we believe stupid things. We believe things that contradict the evidence. Now, living by the spiritual realm, living by God's direction, is not craziness, it's not madness. It doesn't ignore the evidence. It may go beyond the evidence, but it doesn't ignore it. And it's not a question of us trying to have more faith. We all have the capacity to live this way. And if you find it difficult, simply say, Lord, I'm finding this difficult, help me. That's a decision. You're living in the reality of the divine. God will help you. Back to our description. We're living in the context of this unseen spiritual reality. We can't usually see God at all. We take God seriously and respond accordingly. There's a whole spiritual realm that is beyond our eyesight. That's faith. That's living by faith, or living by faithfulness. But that, if we're honest, is the most difficult problem in it all. How do we hear God? And we have all sorts of self-doubts. Is it just what I think? Is it my opinion? Have I got this wrong? And sometimes we're listening for God, and it's like listening in a room with a set of brick walls. We don't hear anything. How do we hear God? Now that's the subject of a whole series of presentations, listening to God. Let me just give a few pointers that might help us. Because the danger is that we claim it's from God when it's just what we want. We start off by taking that step. If we're facing difficult situations, difficult decisions, a way ahead, a problem, whatever it is, the ordinary things of life, ask God to speak. Ask God to show you, maybe show you through the day you're facing. And then pray against your own personal desires. There's things that you want, that I want, that seem good to us. Say, Lord, don't let that happen unless it's your will. God never speaks and contradicts what the Bible teaches. So if you think God said something, just check it back with what the Bible's saying. And ask God for clear confirmation. Lord, I think if this is what you're saying, but if I've got this right, confirm it to me, show me. God will answer that prayer. But that's the key one. God said to Abram, up sticks, move, go to a land that I'm going to show you. Abram just lost his father. You're a nephew with his wife, his own wife. He had servants, he had flocks, possessions. He up sticks and went, and he didn't know where he was going. That is an example, a brilliant and wonderful and glorious example. We take God seriously and respond accordingly. That's taking action. It'll cost you all you've got, but it leads to fulfillment, as Abraham found. This is part of the letter to the Hebrews. There is a whole complete set that's on YouTube. The next presentation will develop this a little bit further and look at the practicalities of living by faith.